Welcome to the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Schuy. I have a Bachelor of Psychology, Masters of Counselling, and Masters of Social Work. My aim is to normalise rather than pathologise life. And in this podcast, we talk all things therapy, women's mental health, leadership, and business. So if you're ready to learn some tips, tricks, and hear some amazing stories to really amplify your life and your business, let's get into it. Welcome again to the 4Q podcast.
Welcome to the 4Q podcast. My name is Jason Schuy and I'm your host for this episode. You might be asking, who is this guy? And why is he on this show? I want to hear Sheena's pleasant, comforting, reassuring Aussie voice. Well, I am Sheena's brother, and as you can hear, I am far from Australian. I am all the way from Canada, as they say in Australia, down under, and I was her guest on episode 2. If you haven't heard it, it's awesome, and I highly encourage you to listen to it. In that episode 3 years ago, I told Sheena that if she makes it to 100 episodes, I would host the 100th episode and interview her. I am a man of my word, and here I am. So with me today is Sheena Schuy, self-help podcast guru, healthcare professional, businesswoman, mother, and all-around great person to hang around with. Welcome, Sheena, to your own podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show. And what a great intro. I love that intro you gave me as well.
Only the best for my sis. So, but before we get to the 4 Qs, tell us, this is your 100th episode. Yay!
Yay!
How do you feel about this milestone?
Yeah, I cannot believe it's been 100 episodes. You know, for those who are listening who've been following for a while, this podcast has grown. It's really interesting, actually. We were just talking off air before about, you know, I really do feel like I'm a different person to who I was in, I think, 2020 or 2021 when I started the podcast till now. It's incredible, and this the way that I speak, the way that I hold myself, and you know, personally, a lot's happened since that time. But this is my safe space. This podcast, regardless of social media, regardless of you know the other stuff going in the business, it feels like my safe space to always come back to. And I always love connecting with the listeners. You know, you're here, you're consistent, you're investing in yourself. And I truly feel like I can be my best self here. So I have a really special spot for this podcast.
That's awesome. Well, I know that the 4 Qs, as you have schooled me on, starts with reflect on who you are and like introducing yourself. But I think because I think people on the podcast already know who you are if you've listened to Sheena's podcast before. What question I have is, has your definition of yourself changed since episode 1? What is different in how you introduce yourself now versus then?
I've come to realize that I'm much more confident in saying who I am now, you know, so I've come to also realize that confidence starts off as an action and ends up turning into a feeling. So, you know, I act confident before I am confident, and then it ends up becoming this cycle of I actually feel confident from doing that. So now I can very easily go, yes, I'm Sheena Schuy. I'm the host of the 4Q podcast. I'm the host of a podcast, right? When I first started, it felt the imposter syndrome was so up there and real of who do I think I am, right? What are my family, what are my friends going to think from me hosting a podcast? Do I think I'm all that, right? You know, again, in Australian culture, that tall poppy thing of, you know, why do you think you're cool enough to host a podcast? And now I'm like, I do not care. You know, and don't get me wrong, I value certain friends and family's opinion, people who I respect. But now that I'm very further into business coaching, so I do business coaching now, and I'm okay with that because I've been through so much in business now that something I often tell, my business coaching clients, and I don't mention a lot here, is it's okay to not have your friends and family in your spaces like this. If it stops you from showing up as the person you need to be, it's okay to not have your friends and family on socials, not tell your friends and family about the podcast. If it stops you being the most you version of you, the highest potential of the leader you can become, don't let, people who aren't even your clients stop you from being that person, right? So I think that's the biggest change I've seen in myself.
Oh, well, let me ask you this because you asked me it and it totally stumped me because I had no idea what you were talking about. Has your love language changed in that time?
Hmm. No, my love language is consistently words of affirmation and physical touch. It will always be. And you'll notice that. I think the listeners will, I've never told the listeners that, but the listeners will notice it because often our love language, we receive love in it, but we also give love in that way. And I'm a big compliment person. And so I'm just aware, I think something I'm trying to be aware of is it coming across as genuine? Because I genuinely mean it, but I think sometimes if you're not a words of affirmation person, it might be, is she false flattering me? So, but yeah, my love language has not changed in that way.
Well, you've covered over the 99 episodes, a wide range of topics from business to motherhood, stress management to ADHD, or HD as they say in Australia. Uh, what topic are you finding the most popular that people want to hear about and why?
Burnout. My top podcast of this year was how to actually recover from burnout. My top TikTok post, how to actually recover from burnout. My top posts in on my Instagram this year, so my social media, how to recover from burnout without medication. It is just the biggest topic because I think we've all had a hectic few years, and I think that emphasized what was already going on in people's lives. So if you were already stressed, anxious, struggling financially, emotionally, physically, obviously everything that happened with COVID and work and hybrid working and all of that would have just emphasized that. And so of course the outcome of that is burnout to a whole nother level. So yeah, I think that for sure is the one that people are just coming to me for all the time.
Yeah, I can believe it. I can relate myself. Like even it's been 2023, 2022. Like since COVID, it's kind of been hectic and a lot of change for a lot of people. And I know even for myself, 2024 is my sabbatical year. So time to not commit to anything. Commit
Yeah.
commitment avoidance.
And that's it. Like that is a big part of burnout and burnout recovery is actually going, you know what? I got to fill my cup first. I got to put the boundaries in place. And exactly as you're saying, like, yeah, I'm going to have more fun. I'm going to take a sabbatical and being okay with that, particularly when you are the role of, yeah, the host, or, if you're the person that people go to for help or support, or you see yourself as a helper or the one who helps people, it can be really hard to actually step out of that role and go, you know what, I need to step back and, sit with all the emotions that come with not being that person either.
So what do you do to prevent burnout?
Yeah, that's an an interesting question because
If you
it,
do.
yes, no, it ebbs and flows. I think I'm much better at picking it up, but I think for those who've been following me this year, I launched the mastermind model, which is a group coaching model inside both of my core businesses. Savasana Collective and Therapist VA, where I'm not doing back to back to back one-to-one coaching anymore, which is really hard because obviously people associate a therapist doing one-on-one work. So I'm now having to educate people that that's what I do. And it was a conscious decision of I'm going to have to take a financial hit to do that while I grow this. But even though I've had to, do those things, take the financial hit, rejig the business, rejig my social media, totally worth it because, for those of you following, I have young kids, I'm going through a separation, I've got my, own health to think about. That group coaching model is so fantastic because now, I'm not having that guilt or that burnout of if I miss somebody, if I had to take a day off because of sickness for the kids, sickness for myself, like the constant stuff, not having to chase my tail and go, oh, we've got to catch up on this work and this work and this work. Now I have space to actually create programs that actually get people better results. That's the big thing, is I'm not sort of saying, okay, what am I supposed to do, which is one-on-one therapy. I'm actually going, what do you need from me and what aligns with my lifestyle? And so my lifestyle is significantly better because of changing the business model. And so, yeah, I have far less burnout because of that. So I would be saying to people, really asking yourself, like, what is the lifestyle you want to live? And does your career, your business align with that? And if not, what business strategies do you actually need to put in place to get there? Yeah.
Sounds like it's been an eventful year for you. What are you doing to balance it out when it comes to fun?
Oh, to fun. Absolutely. It's like I'm finding myself again. So for those of you who follow me on socials, I recently went to a breath work, workshop thing randomly. Yeah, so I went to a breathwork workshop. I'm just doing things that are out of the norm. So actually in 2024, I'm planning on going back into well, not back into, I want to get some singing lessons because I've always loved singing. I used to love music. I used to actually I was in the band. I played the flute for 6 years between primary school and high school. I loved music. I always used to love music and dance, and it's something that I've really let go by the wayside. So in 2024, I actually want to push myself to sing publicly, to dance again. Yeah, that's definitely going to be my fun thing. But really prioritizing friendships for me in these last few months has been a really big thing because at the end of the day, when we're getting older, I think it's really easy to just take that for granted, or there's so much going on between work and kids and health. If I have the choice between doing something and seeing a friend, I'm going to choose the friend because they might not be there forever. And a lot of people have lost people suddenly, and you never want to wake up and go, oh, like I should have spent more time, I should have took the call, I should have gone for that coffee. I'm never going to be that person who wakes up one day and goes, I should have done more for that person, because I do that now.
Mm, that's great. That's what friends are all about.
And family too, right?
And
You're
family. And
always really
family.
good at
Yeah,
that
it's a
stuff.
village.
Yes,
Takes a village.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if you have anything else to add to reflect, but the next would be redefine. What has been a defining or pivotal moment in your life that has changed your perspective, meaning of life? What has done that since, I guess we'll put it in the past 3 years since your first episode?
Well, it's interesting. I actually was going to go back further than that because there are lots of things that have happened in the last 3 years that I could redefine on. And it's interesting being the guest now because when you ask that question, what's a redefining moment? Obviously in our lives there's so many that you could pick from. But all the ones that I've thought of have already been talked about on this podcast, right? Like becoming a mother, starting a business, suffering from burnout. Those are some really common ones that people, my guests on the show, have come up, or like a health condition, like having something where you're in the hospital and it changes your life forever. But for me, I think something that hasn't been talked about openly, even by a lot of therapists I know, is the friendship breakdowns. It really, so that's my redefining moment. Is I actually had a friendship group breakdown about 10 or 11 years ago, and it was at the worst timing as well, and it really sent my mental health into a really not good space. So, without going into too much detail, basically, I was in a really good space of my life. So, I actually was in a space, I was in my early 20s, felt like I was getting myself together, or sorry, mid 20s. I was finishing my master's degree, had my brothers from Canada visiting for my graduation. I was with my, then boyfriend at the time, who ended up being my husband later on. But, we were together for a year. We were very much in love. It was just an exciting time, like new partner, new career, finishing my master's. I was going to be moving in with him into a new town. So there was all this exciting things happening. And in the same week I was finishing my degree, my friends we just had this massive falling out, but I didn't know it was coming. And it was several people attacking me at once. And it really affected me, because after that, what happened was I moved to a town with my then boyfriend, but I didn't actually have any friends or family. And I started working in a really hectic area. So as a therapist, obviously we hear a lot of hard things, but at the time I was counseling kids in the child protection system. So you can imagine I was
Wow.
hearing heavy stuff day in, day out, broken systems. So it was a lot, and my nervous system was shot. I was so high strung, so anxious. My social anxiety, like I was just being awkward in situations because I was so socially anxious. And then when it came to the evenings or the weekends, I would just be in bed. I'd do my workout, I'd clean the house, and I would just lay down and not get up. And it was not a good space. But I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes I think we think that social anxiety and anxiety or trauma happens just from, significant, partners or family or instances, but it can happen from friendship breakdowns too, or just things unexpectedly coming at you. And I think that's important to talk about. So that's why that was a really redefining moment for me, was going through that friendship issue, moving to that town, and really kind of struggling with anxiety for a good 2 years.
Mm. And
Mm.
you said that was in your mid 20s,
Mhm.
right? So now that you're in your 30s, how have you found the difference to be just in your life and the stage of
Mm.
where you're at in your life?
Yeah. So I guess that feeds into the redesigning part. We always talk about what was the defining moment, and then how did you redesign your life after that? And I think the two big things for me was during that time engaging with the therapist, and then seeing a business coach down the road. Those two things really helped me. And so it was funny because I didn't actually go to the therapist looking for therapy. What happened? And that's the thing, is like I always encourage other therapists to see a therapist, because I think it makes us better clinicians. But also, anyone should see therapy. Like, go to therapy because it's personal development. Even if you feel like you're not struggling with mental health per se, there's so much you can learn about yourself, your relationships in that space. But I actually went to her for external supervision because of all the stuff I was dealing with at work. It was so much. I like just needed to talk to someone about work. So I went to her for, what we would call external supervision. So someone to help me with my practice. But because she was outside of my agency and I was paying her independently, we also did some therapeutic work. And that was the first person who actually acknowledged that I'm struggling with anxiety. Like, saying it out loud is one thing to
Mm.
know it. It's another thing for someone to reflect it back to you that that's actually what's going on. That was really pivotal for me because I couldn't be in denial about it anymore.
Mm.
So that was really big. And then that started my therapeutic journey, right? So I saw a therapist, but also seeing a naturopath was really big for my mental health too. Because I think something I do recommend to all of my clients, which is where the holistic therapist part comes in, I want you to get a blood test to test your vitamins because often something like a B12 deficiency really mimics depression. And there's so many people who get a B12 infusion or an iron infusion and their mood is instantly better. They haven't had to talk about
Mm.
their childhood trauma and do all the deep therapeutic work. Like, if we can get the low hanging fruit of, are you eating right? Are you exercising? Are your vitamins right? Are you sleeping okay? That, are you drinking enough water? That was this work that I was doing with my naturopath. So I think it started with the therapist, went to the naturopath, which again, I always recommend with my clients. Let's start there because that's an easier win. And then seeing business coaches later on. So part of this journey of evolving into who I am today has been seeing my business coaches because it's almost like, and you've been in business, so I think you get this and you might want to speak to this too, but the therapist that I had, it's almost like they were cutting the cords of what was holding me back, and the business coaches were pulling me forward into the person I could be. So
Mm.
it's almost
Mhm.
like the therapist was making sure the past didn't pull me backwards, and the business coaches were like, Sheena, who can you be? I see that in you. Let's make sure you see that in yourself too, because you have so
Mm.
much potential here. So
Mhm.
that for me was those redefining and redesigning moments of, yeah, they're pulling me forward. They're bringing me into the person I needed to be.
So what kind of tools do you use or have you used or you continue to use that help you in your current state as you work towards, your goal, your life, you know,
Hmm.
life goals?
Yeah, so now, like, now that I'm sort of, mostly recovered from that, everyone has those moments where you feel, one day you might be burnt out and you might have an anxious day, but that's very different from actually suffering from burnout or suffering from an anxiety disorder. We can have an anxious and burnt out state versus actually having an anxiety disorder. So, of course, I'm still going to have days where I'm anxious a bit more or a bit burnt out because kids, just young kids, it's going to
Are there
happen.
vitamins for kids? Are there vitamins to deal with the stress of children?
I don't know how much magnesium I can
How much
take.
B12 do you need for that?
And that's the acknowledgement too of, we all live in a society that is stress inducing. So something I acknowledge for myself and for my clients is, I could get you to the optimal state. You're sleeping 8 hours, you're doing all the right things, you've got great friends, great family. At the end of the day, the society that we live in now, the lifestyles that most of us live in, aren't conducive to what our ancestors live, our evolutionary development, our DNA. So there is still going to be a level of stress that all of us have just because of the urban lifestyle. So I think that that's part of it, acknowledging that. But what I do now is, I really do, annoyingly and cliche as it is, I practice what I preach, which is, I try to make space for some kind of mindfulness or meditation every day. I try to walk more. Walking is definitely something that not only is it physically good for me, but we know that the level of blood flow that happens when you're walking versus running, etc., it's very good for the brain, and preventing things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all those things. But I have the best ideas when I'm walking, and walking without, earphones in or a podcast or music. Sometimes it's just going for silence. I might have my headphones in and not listening, but that's
Mhm.
when I really get the most clarity. So, and it's a mindfulness thing too, almost like a moving mindfulness. So, yeah, mindfulness, meditation, walking, drinking water, but also, like I mentioned, like prioritizing my relationships. Co-regulation is something that we don't acknowledge enough, but that's when I see you, like, even we know this through Zoom even as well. I can see you, I can see your facial expressions. There's all this unconscious stuff in my brain happening right now just from this interaction, versus if I went to 24 hours without interacting with another person, my brain is going to operate differently, my nervous system is going to operate differently. So I really think that prioritizing friendships, family, making the time for people and being mindful with my kids too has really helped me better manage, my susceptibility to anxiety, which comes from some past trauma stuff. But yeah, I think if you're predisposed to anxiety in that way, we have to be even more kind of getting the 8 hours of sleep, doing all the boring things that we know we're supposed to do, but we don't do. I think that has been, I prioritize that over everything.
Those are, and I hear you. Those are things that can help you, psychologically, and to keep you in a good stage so that you don't necessarily go, down in the dumps.
Mm.
But what are those things that you're doing to help when it comes to inspiration, when it comes to, building yourself up
Mm.
and feeling good, for your future?
Absolutely. And so I walked away from organized religion as a teenager a long time ago, but there was still something about having a daily practice, daily rituals of some kind to get you into that space. And so I'm really big on Abraham Hicks, you know that. But I always tend to listen to things about the law of attraction. But I have about 5 business coaches, and I'm going to do a post on this soon. But I have about 5 business coaches because a couple of the business coaches, like I said, I watch their YouTubes, I'll listen to their podcasts, not for the strategy, literally for that inspiration. They are operating at a level that I want to be at. And so I'm very conscious of curating my social media. I'm very hyper aware of what I allow my mind to indulge in. So I don't watch the news. I try to avoid it best I can. If there are accounts on my Instagram or social media that don't make me feel good, for whatever reason, I just don't follow it or I mute them, whatever it is. And I'm very conscious of filling my mind with, yeah, positive inspiration, people who are taking care of their relationships, taking care of their health, making good money, if you're around that, you're going to be the sixth person, right? We always talk about the 5 people, if you hang around 5 broke people, you'll be the sixth. I think in this online world we live in, and I talked about this with a manifestation coach, Haley Mill, a few episodes ago. Sometimes, we always say, get in the room with those people, get in the room with entrepreneurs, get in the room with $1 million, people making millions of dollars, because you'll feed off that energy, you'll feed off that inspiration. But it's really hard in the beginning. You're like, where do I even find a millionaire? Where do they even hang out? You don't know. So I
Hmm.
think curating that online, find the podcasts that leave you going, I can do anything, right? Find the YouTube, the people that do that for you. And it doesn't have to be many. I have maybe 2 or 3 people that I start my day with, or even if I can't start my day within the first half of the day, I make sure I tune into that because their level of where they're at, they just make me feel good. I think people really need to find that thing that brings you back to who are you capable of being.
So true. I know, back when I was in my 20s and 30s, which I know doesn't seem that long ago when you look at me because I look so young. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I read a ton of books. Stephen Covey, if you haven't read it, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, the Bible, you know, um, looking at, Tony Robbins or, like you said, like even like The Secret or Abraham Hicks. These kinds of things can really help. And the interesting thing is, in a lot of from a lot of teachers, I've heard these things, but definitely I've seen it over time as well. Creation actually happens twice. The first
Mm.
time you think it, the first time you mull it over, the first time you go through the concept of understanding what would it be like if, before it actually happens in reality. And so, it gets back to the part, what's the part of what's the part of the person in that journey? And part of the person is thinking about what you want, thinking in detail about what you want. I can honestly say that there's another book out there, The Power of Productivity, and it's a great book. It was from a gentleman that had interviewed, he was a psychologist, he interviewed 500 of the so-called most successful people in the world, including Bill Gates and a lot of other entrepreneurs, and what we're trying to understand, what are the commonalities with these people that have helped with their success. And one of the things that they had mentioned was have a day that's called a creative day. Almost every single one of them had a day that was it was unscripted. It was a day that they could do whatever they wanted and or do nothing. And they did that every week. And I remember starting to pattern myself to do that. And I'd take Wednesday mornings and I'd go to Starbucks or I'd go out to the driving range. I might listen to a podcast at the same time and just kind of hear inspirational things. And over time, you start to build like a psychological momentum, in starting to get more and more refined and more in tune with what do you really want. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I want $1 million or I want $10 million, but to honestly understand what that means, watch that show. I can't remember the name of it, where it's all the lottery winners,
Oh no,
all the
I
people
haven't
that win
seen it.
lotteries. All the
Oh,
all the people that win lotteries. It's like the most horrible show ever because these people actually got what they thought they wanted without knowing what they wanted. And they wound up a lot of times in a worse situation than
mm,
when they didn't have the money. Because if you really feel like you need $10 million, that's going to solve all your problems. Okay, well, what happens once you have it? Then what?
yeah,
Do you think about, your friends all of a sudden saying, can you loan me a few bucks? Or, you start to realize, oh, you know what? The tax man is after me for this amount. Or, I'm using private jets all over the place, and now it's the end of the year, and I got nothing left. Like all of these things that, do I know how to manage money? Do I not know how to manage money? All of these things go into it to come up with that concept. And some of the things like what you're talking about, like, putting yourself in that situation before you're actually in the situation really makes a huge difference.
yeah, absolutely. And again, that's another practice that I have as well is very frequently, I'd say at least every day or two, I redo a future self meditation where I literally visualize the house that I'm in, who I'm with, what I'm eating. On my YouTube, I have a 5 minute coffee cups visualization where you actually bring something in your present life into that visual because it makes it feel more real. So what does that actually feel like for me? And because I know what does that vision feel like? And it's not about the money, right? The money actually is just buying you what you think you want to feel, which is security, safety, joy, whatever you think it's going to buy you. But I think about those feelings and who I am in that life. And so now in my everyday life, I have these moments where I stop and I go, that's the feeling. I'm already living it. I'm already feeling it. And then you naturally have a sense of gratefulness because you're like, there's a part of you that realizes, like, yes, of course I want that, but I'm already recreating that now, which is, a really good thing to do. And then also coming back to the core values too, where that again, I don't know if it's in the Stephen Covey book. Actually, it might be from his book. There's definitely someone who started this in the personal development world. I have to look back on it, but that exercise where you walk through the door and you realize it's your own funeral and someone's reading a
Yes.
eulogy.
Yeah, that's it. That was in that book. Yeah, the Seven Habits. That was. I think that's actually how the book started. Is you want
Yeah.
to understand what's really important to you? Write your own eulogy.
Yeah, and so it's such a powerful exercise because it also brings you back to your core values. Because I think people think of core values as these wishy-washy kind of, oh, what does that even mean? Or, oh, it's motherhood's a value, or business or health is a value. Like, no, those things are things that you value, but the core values are, who are you at your core as a person? What's important to you? Like your top three things. Do you want to be described as someone who like valued love and really took the time for people? Do you want to be described as someone who always tried new things and was never scared of stepping out of the box? Or do you want to be described as someone who worked all the time, never saw their friends and family, was so busy hustling that they made all this money but they don't care about anyone, right? Do you imagine that there's no one at your funeral because you didn't make the time? So I
Hmm.
think that exercise is just so powerful and really getting you to think about, who do I want to be and how do I make that happen now, not in the future, like right now. So
So true. And you can always have that feeling. You don't have to have things to have that feeling. It's kind of like window shopping. You can still
mm,
go window shopping. You don't have to buy it, and you can still have that feeling of that just joy of knowing what it would feel like to have it. And it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling. So I know we're getting close to the end here. I just want to ask you one other question. The future. What does the future look like for Sheena Schuy?
it's so exciting. We're making a big pivot. I think some of you have been following me. We're making a big pivot where we're definitely working with a lot more business owners, leaders, but I want people to become industry leaders. That's the direction that we're going. And that, again, that sounds like some wishy-washy term, because this podcast, it's still personal development. Even if you're not in business, even if you're, still working a 9 to 5, I know you'll get a lot out of this for yourself. But we're definitely moving in that direction because if you ask yourself, who do I want to become? How can I use my knowledge, my skills, my passion? What is something that if I could leave this world, again, the eulogy thing, and the one thing that I can be remembered actually helping people for. So, not just who I am, but what's the one message that my legacy, my business leaves for people? What is that going to be? And you can't do that by just doing boring business. It's really easy to set up a business and make money. It's a big difference to be an industry leader. And so that's the direction we're going, is I'm going to do the same thing that my therapist, my naturopath, my business coach did to me in the one space at Savasana Collective and Therapist VA, which is we are going to pull the best parts out of you to create businesses, services, products that actually change the world. Because again, the Steve Jobs quote, the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. And that's the direction that we're going. So I'm hoping that I change somebody's world, your world, whoever's listening, by making you be that industry leader.
That is amazing. Well, you're definitely an inspiration to me and to those people that love you.
Yes.
And we are so proud of what you've done, let alone getting to 100 episodes, but just in the lives that you've affected and the positive energy that you exude. It's definitely inspiring, and it's something that will hopefully have a long-lasting impact, not just for your children and for your family and friends, but hopefully for people listening to this podcast as well. So thank
Oh,
you.
thanks, Jay. And thanks for being such an amazing host. You definitely should get your own podcast.
Who
For anyone
knew? Who knew?
for anyone listening, I've been trying to convince this guy to have his own podcast for a while because I would tune in. I know that I would learn a lot. So, but I really appreciate you taking the time for me too. You know, this guy's got a busy schedule. So the fact that we've got him here today is a real privilege for all of us.
This is great. It was such a pleasure. It's always great spending time with my sis. So this is wonderful, and I hope everybody listening to this gets some benefit out of it. And it's a real positive influence on the internet and in the social media world. So congratulations on number 100.
Incredible. Oh, thanks, Jay. All right. And thanks for everyone for tuning in to another episode.